Itself is probably like $15,000.
You must start taking bets with your wife when you buy this stuff to see how long it's going to take you to sell it.
Okay.
Start giving her over-under odds.
You know,
Actually,
I fully believe you will sell it. I just wonder how long it's going to sit before.
But you know what though, it would be a fun thing to kind of track that, like truly track it and see. Because you remember when I walked in here with all those 18 carts? And stuff, and now we're down to like 4 that I use.
I believe you. I mean, I know that you were going to sell them. I just it always comes in. You bring it in, and it's like, they'll be out by next week, don't worry.
So, you know what's funny about that story?
No, they won't.
But you telling that, if I'm hearing things from 2 different people on the same thing on 2 different ends, right?
Yeah.
So when I was shopping for my wife's birthday and Mother's Day stuff, because, you know, I always get hit with the double whammy. Her birthday is always right before Mother's Day, or sometimes on Mother's Day. And so I'm at Walmart in the little crafting aisle because she's got into crafting stuff, so I'm grabbing some little crafting things for her. And this other lady comes up and she actually starts helping me. She's like, you know, hey, what are you planning on doing with whatever it is that I was holding? I was like, well, hopefully making my wife happy. And so she gives me a couple of tips, like, you might want to grab this, you might want to grab that. And so she was an employee at Joann's for like 15 years. And she was like, yeah, they just got bought out by some big liquidator. And so now they're bringing in like all this random stuff that we have never carried in Joann's at all. And trying to get people to get the rest of the stuff out of the store. So they're just cutting all kind of weird deals and this, that, and the other. So to hear you say that you walked in there and did that, I'm like, so now I hear it from both sides. That's crazy.
Well, the funny part was this Joann's. I had never been in a Joann's like that, right? Turns out it was a concept store. So they were even like differently decorated than normal, right?
Yes.
And it was, yeah, it was pretty cool. I still got to go back next week to get the big light boxes and stuff that we didn't get. Some of them are.
Yeah, the company that bought them is just one of those big liquidators, and so they just start filling it up with all this other stuff. So it's kind of crazy. All right, I think we are ready to roll. Turtlesmith Podcast, Season 2, Episode 8. And countdown in 5, 4, 3.
Hey, back for another one. It's
Yeah,
been a long week.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's been a great week. It feels like it just went by in just like minutes.
Yeah. Wow. Well, what do you got for us this week? What are we talking about?
Well, last week we talked about getting hired, so this week we're going to talk about getting fired.
Okay.
I come to you with not great news. The market has changed, and this isn't news that you're going to want to hear. Ultimately, it was my decision. I wanted you to hear from me. This is the second time in my career I'm doing this. The last time I did it, I cried. This time I hope to be stronger. We are laying off about 15% of the company. If you're on this call, you are part of the unlucky group. Your employment here is terminated, effective immediately.
I think it's a lack of empathy. I think it's the quintessential corporate top percentage saying I'm choosing numbers over people. And I think it struck a chord with everybody saying, aha, see, I told you, they don't care. They don't care at all. And I think that anyone who's seen that video goes, oh, that was cold and callous. There's no empathy there. And where's our empathy as a country, right? Where's our empathy? It's okay to cry when you fire people. You know, firings happen. It's part of life. Layoffs, it happens. But it's how you do it. And that's why I think it went viral. It's how it was done.
I think that the rest of it's more the same. What do you think about that? Have you seen that video before?
I have not seen that one.
Yeah.
I mean, I do think, I don't know that it was, I mean, yeah, I guess it was cold a little bit, but the whole thing about, you know, I think he just let himself cry, you know. It's a it's a tough deal. I don't know that there's any easy way to do it, but I will say this. I would try my best not to fire people right before, you know, the major holidays, the Christmas time and everything.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. Do your best to do it after, if possible. Yeah.
And I don't know that there's any real good way to do any mass firings, you know, but I have seen, you know, CEOs say, we're going to take care of you. We're going to give you, we're going to give you a decent severance. We're going to help you with unemployment. We're going to help you with retraining if you need it. So there have been companies that actually plan for this. They budget for it, and they do make resources available to help people transition. And that's definitely the better way to go about it.
Yeah, in Wichita, where I grew up, is a big aerospace place. They're like Raytheon, Beechcraft, which I think now is Raytheon, Spirit Air, all these big airlines. So it always became a thing that you would see in the news every 3 or 4 years. There'd be hiring booms, and then there would be mass layoffs as the market went up and down and people were ordering, new planes or slowing down in the market. This is a terrible way, in my opinion, to do mass layoffs. You shouldn't call everyone onto a Zoom call to fire 800 people all at the same time.
To tell them they're part of the unlucky group.
Right, that's ridiculous. It's lazy. It's immature. It's silly. He does it like this too, so he doesn't actually have to look at any of the employees.
Right.
He's in his office, probably not even in the same city.
And it's obviously, someone's recording this. It becomes a marketing faux pas for the company.
Yeah, it's terrible way.
What is Better.com anyway? What do they do?
I have no idea.
They're definitely not better at firing.
Fair enough. But yeah, that's a terrible way to do it. Like you said, there's no easy way to fire people, and it's never a pleasant conversation. But you can do it in a way that most people will understand. Like the guy said at the very end, layoffs and firings happen. It's a part of business, but there's a good way and a bad way to do it. And this company failed miserably, I think.
Yeah, I know a lot of people are sweating it right now too. At this particular time is. We're starting to see some of the bigger tech companies laying people off, and
yeah, well, we're experiencing just a lot of volatility because of our leadership. That we don't really know what the hell's happening. Every day it seems like the news changes a little.
I know that there's a lot of small businesses in this country that are really sweating it because as we talked about last week, the importance of hiring, right? If you're a small business and you've spent resources really finding a good team, putting together good people. And then suddenly, a giant portion of your income is cut off because the president just decides he's gonna do tariffs or some other weird thing, open up a trade war, and now for the next quarter, you can't even get goods because you can't possibly afford to bring them in.
Well, it makes it super difficult to plan. I know a lot of companies don't even know what's going on.
Then you think to yourself, well, am I going to lose these people that I've spent, a few years cultivating and building this great team? We've been humming along, we're doing great. And millions of small businesses have sprung up in the last 10 years solely on the basis of being able to connect with suppliers in foreign countries, primarily in China, but also in other countries. That business-to-business connection where formerly there was just no way to communicate.
But before the big internet boom, the last 20 years.
And now they can, and now they're able to be in all these niche spots, these niche industries. If you have a product idea, you can find a manufacturer.
Yep.
You can rent a warehouse and you can sell 10,000 units of something a month and provide a nice stable income for a small group of people.
Yeah. And now's the best time to do it. Well, not this moment, because we're waiting on the nonsense to recover, but in this day and age, it is with all the communication.
So, this last video we watched was, somebody doing a mass firing, but the thing that affects us in the small business world so much more is when business, when you have to fire someone that you don't really want to fire, and you think to yourself, I don't know that I'll ever be able to really replace them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it makes it. It's disastrous.
And usually you really like them because you know them personally, as I said before, this could be something where it can go bad if you get too close to them. But oftentimes we do get close to people when we're working together.
Yeah.
You get to know them. You get to know a little bit about their families and stuff, and you
40
care.
hours a week, multiple years. You spend a lot of time with somebody.
So, that to me is one of the things that I think government has a responsibility to do, is to try to keep things on an even keel so we don't have that volatility, right?
Yeah.
So that they often say small businesses are the backbone of this country. Mm-hmm. So why don't we protect that backbone?
Yeah.
Anyway.
What's next?
The most efficient way to fire someone.
So many stories where employees were about to get fired. They knew they were about to get fired.
Can we
And
pause
the
that real
person
quick?
firing them started out by saying,
Sorry. I thought we just answered that. You do a Zoom call and tell them they were all unlucky.
I mean, that is the efficient way to fire.
Okay, please continue. I just had to get that thought out.
Start it over. Yeah.
There were so many stories where employees were about to get fired. They knew they were about to get fired. And the person firing them started out by saying, how are you? I mean, come on. It's well-intentioned, but it's off base.
So the better approach is coming in and saying, got some bad news.
Got bad news.
Today's your last day at our organization.
That would be perfect. They're not going to be shocked. They're going to appreciate the warning. They're going to appreciate the fact that you then didn't let them twist in the wind for a long period of time. Give people the chance to be emotionally resilient, and they will be.
Now, what about what comes after that? Because I've seen certain business owners really struggle where, because you have that level of empathy, what could be a 5-minute meeting turns into an hour meeting because it's almost like you're trying to soften it for them.
Yeah, and an attempt to soften it is well-intentioned, but torturous.
Sometimes you fire the wrong ones, sometimes you fire the right ones. The biggest lesson I learned is I wish I would have fired them faster. A lot of your relationships personally too are like that. I would tell you this, if you're in business and someone's not starting out the right way, fire them fast. If you're in a relationship and someone's not starting out the right way, fire them real fast.
Well, we got two there, back to back. That first one though, I think was the guy in the very first video was talking about, you know, it was a lack of empathy. And then in the second video there, that guy was saying, you shouldn't be empathetic. Just get right to the point. This business, people can be emotionally resilient. What do you think about when you fire somebody? Should you try to soften the blow or just get straight to the point?
Man, I tell you, it really is situational for me.
Mm-hmm.
I have been fortunate, I guess, not to really have market downturn reasons to this point to fire people.
Yeah.
I'm not, you know what? I take that back. I take it back. And it wasn't a market downturn. It was a partnership issue where I spent like a month hiring someone, right? We negotiated a pay package. We negotiated a severance package. I'd never thought about a severance package, but this guy came from the corporate world and he thought about it. And literally like a week or so after I hired him, my former partners decide that they're going to cut me off and, you know, demand payment. And I don't want to get into a whole story about why I was behind on payment, but basically the hiring was reflecting, you know, continuing business and getting the orders back on track and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I literally, you know, had to fire him, you know, had to let him go within 2 weeks of hiring him. And
I bet he was happy he did that severance package.
oh yeah, but he was real gracious and he let me pay that severance package out over the course of a year.
Mm-hmm.
But he insisted on it.
Yeah.
You know, and rightfully so, because he was like, you know, that was what we agreed on.
Yeah.
And to this day, he's one of my best friends. You know, guy I call up sometimes and get advice from, and just a really great guy. But that was the only time that I've ever had like a business situation cause me to fire someone where I just literally didn't have the money to keep them employed.
Yeah.
So I've not had that situation where I've had to say, well, the market has changed or anything like that. So with that in mind, you know, I do have a hard time firing people because I hire them with the best of intentions and the best of expectations. I give lots of chances. And I do try to soften the blow when I fire people.
Yeah.
So I get that. You know, one thing that I didn't agree with in the video though is like where he says, well, today's your last day. I don't think you should ever spring a last day on someone without cause. If someone's obviously troublesome, you know, or there's a problem where you think they're going to cause damage to your company, maybe that's the time when you go, you know, today's your last day. But other than that, I would be like, you know, I ask people to give me 2 weeks notice, and I would try to give them 2 weeks notice, and give them time to wrap things up, give us time to, you know, get on board with the projects that they're working on, stuff like that, and whatever customers they're talking to and things like that. So I think that if you have a pretty good relationship with the person, that can work out. but again, it's situational. You know, there are times when we've fired people where it has been something where I've just lost trust, and they just have to go.
I somewhat agree with you, but I also disagree pretty heavily on trying to give people notice of when they're going to be terminated, even if it's a person that you like and they're close to you. It's kind of a business thing, you know. I mean, it's not personal. I can get where you're coming from, though, but I tend to take the more approach of, you know, this is your last day, we appreciate all your hard work, but it's just not working out. But I would try to give them a little something, you know, at the end, a little severance or something like that, even if we're not required to. But keeping somebody in your organization that knows they've been fired to work a couple extra weeks, or even when they quit, like give their 2 weeks notice, like it's kind of hard to keep them there. Sometimes you have to, you know, if you're a small organization, you need somebody to come in and train them. But once somebody turns in their resignation, or they know they're going to be terminated, they're kind of coasting. They're not going to. You're not going to get a quarter of the work out of them that you did before, you know.
Well, I mean, I don't know that I totally agree with that, because I just think it depends on the character and the ethics of the person that you're dealing with.
Yeah.
And if you've hired for that, you know, then I think you have a reason. I think it's reasonable to expect it. Right.
Yeah. I guess it too also kind of depends on the industry that you're in and what the job is specifically. So if it's more of a professional job, like an engineer or a lawyer or accountant or something like that, there are better expectations of when you leave, whether you're getting a severance, those kind of things. If it's just an hourly employee, it's a little different.
Let's pull the employees in the room. If you got told that you were getting fired and you had 2 weeks, would you still give 100% or try to wrap things up correctly, or would you just want to get out of there?
Me personally, I would continue to finish it up. I would want, just me as a person, would want to wrap things up in a nice way. But I do think it would be hard to maintain like a positive attitude about the work. I mean, knowing that you're booted, so.
What about you, Calvin?
I'd give you 100% on all of the remaining tasks that I have left for however long it takes me to finish those, and then for whatever time I have until my last day, I'm like Scott said, I'm coasting.
So I think, you know, there's a range there, and
Yeah.
It's situational, and I guess it kind of depends on how you feel, how the employer feels about the person, and how the employee feels at that moment, you know. So
Yeah, that makes sense. Maybe a little bit more. But I think trying to get the empathy out, trying to soften the blow, trying to do anything like that is most oftentimes backfires, and you end up in a softer or a poor situation with the employee where you're trying to soften the blow. If you just give it to them straight, we're all adults. It is what it is.
yeah, that's, you know, and part of that I think for me is trying to be as transparent and honest about the whole situation the whole way.
Yeah.
You know? A lot of employers, they will hide, you know, bad situations. The money's dwindling, things like that, you know, and employees might sense that there's something wrong, but not really be able to know it because they don't have enough insight.
I think the employees see the writing on the wall, you know, when it's coming down the pipe. Well, that last video that we kind of skipped through right at the end, it was talking about, you know, just fire fast. And I think a lot of people struggle with that, especially in small business. They'll hire somebody and they'll let them go far too long without firing them. I actually have a funny story from my dad. He had to fire somebody in our little family business, and my grandpa told him we had to let him go, and it was my dad's job to fire him, and it took my dad 6 months to actually fire him, to get up the courage to get it done. And then I think my dad still paid for his health insurance for a year after he quit.
Well, your dad is more like me in that situation. That's the kind of stuff I look to do. Now, we had somebody that you know, started out fairly decently, and then, you know, she deteriorated kind of quickly. Mm-hmm. But she had the cutest little girl, and she, you know, I let her bring her little girl over because when she didn't have,
hard.
You know, and then so when I thought about when we started to think about having to let her go, right, for performance issues, I was thinking about that little girl and thinking what's going to happen to her.
Yeah, it's so much harder too when you're a small business and you really know all your employees. Like all the people who work for us, like I mean I don't know them personally, but I know that they have families and kids and all that stuff. So it becomes an extra weight on your shoulders as the employer. The guy at Better.com, he doesn't give a crap because they have 10,000 employees.
Yeah.
Everybody's just a number. But when you have 5, it's really hard.
Yeah, I think the guy that says fire fast, you know, I think that situation right there is, if you have very clear expectations and they're not being met, and they were promised to have been met, that's a situation where I think firing fast comes into play. You know, I always remember the story. It was the CEO of IBM had a vice president that made a mistake that cost the company like $500,000 back in the 60s, when, you know, $500,000 was considerable.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's still considerable, but yeah.
Yeah, but it's quaint. It's quaint now, you know.
Yeah.
Now we hardly ever mention billions because we're talking trillions, right? But he was being interviewed on some show or something like that, and they said, well, you know, so and so, you know, made this mistake, cost your company $500,000. Are you going to fire him? And he says, no. Why would I fire him? I've just spent $500,000 training him.
Yeah, yeah. The fire fast motto, to me, is not fire immediately. It's just when you get that feeling in your stomach that it's time to let this person go, that's when you need to fire them. Not you've got the feeling and you're like, well, maybe we'll give it a few more weeks or a few more months and see how it goes, and then putting it off. It's really just when you get that gut instinct, which all entrepreneurs and small business owners should be following their gut, because that's what gets them to where they want to go. When you first have that feeling like, I think maybe I need to fire this person, that's the time to do it. You know, so fast doesn't mean immediately, or because they made 1 or 2 mistakes, you know, while they were learning, or even if they made a mistake after they've been with you for 5 years, like, you know, that guy. It's just, once you have the feeling that it's time to let somebody go, that's when to pull the trigger, not 6 months later.
Yeah.
Because you'll be bummed about it.
I really feel like there's no easy answer, you know.
Yeah.
And that's what kind of bugs me about some of these videos that we watch, where
they do try to simplify.
They're so definitive, you know, and so matter of fact. And I'm like, I think every situation's a little bit different.
Well, it's easy for these people to do it because they're not in that situation at that time. You know, they're just thinking about what other people should do, and exactly what we're doing. We're telling you what you should do, but maybe don't listen to us. You know.
Now that first guy that we saw in there, not the 800 guy, 800 people guy, but Chris Voss. Mm-hmm. He's like, if I remember right, he's like a former FBI profiler or negotiator.
Yeah.
And he's got actually a lot of good insight about how to communicate with people. So he's someone that I would listen to for sure. You know, I know that little snippet, I might not have agreed with everything he said about hiring and firing, but as far as communication goes, you can learn a lot from him.
Yeah, 100%. Well, this is a question from Reddit, how to terminate an employee. After 8 years of being in business, this is the first time we've had to terminate an employee. We live in an at-will state, but this employee started having substance abuse problems and stole from us. We've been trying to work through her issues because she was a valued employee in the past, but her behavior is becoming more erratic and she's creating a toxic workplace environment. Does anyone have any advice on how to write a termination letter? How specific should I be for my reasons? My hunch is that I should keep the letter short, but any real life advice from someone who's been through this would be very helpful. So I think it's important to talk a little bit just about the at-will portion. Most states in America are at-will or some version of it. What at-will means is just that you can fire somebody for not having a good cause. You can't fire somebody for a discriminatory reason, like based on race or sexual orientation, nationality, those kind of things. But you can just fire somebody because you don't like them, because you don't think they fit well into your organization. In some states, California I think specifically, you cannot fire people unless you have good cause once you hire them. And you usually have to have an employee contract that lines out what those good causes are. So that's the only difference there with the at-will. But in any state, even in non-at-will state, substance abuse problems is cause for immediate termination.
Well, yeah, I mean, substance abuse, yes, but stealing, absolutely.
Yeah.
That is an instant erosion of trust.
Well, and because you caught him stealing from that,
yeah.
You're always going to think, that's just the first time you caught him.
Yeah.
You know, they probably have stolen from you before.
And I have had that situation happen. I actually had a check cashing company call me up and want restitution on a $1,200 check.
Oh yeah.
Where an employee had taken a check out of our checkbook.
Yeah.
And then it turned out they didn't follow their own rules about how to vet a check.
Yeah, one of those check cashing companies called me about restitution one time. My truck got stolen, and I had a checkbook in there. I didn't even think about it, and they had written a bunch of checks, and the cash place, they cashed them without any issue. Finally, on like the 8th one, they called me. So the bank took care of it all, but yeah, those places do not run right sometimes.
Yeah, you know, the thing with this is that you're not a psychiatrist, you're not a substance abuse clinic, you know, you're not a halfway house. So regardless of how good an employee has been in the past, this is one of those things where they have to work, something they have to work out for themselves.
Yeah. Drinking and drugs and substance abuse in general, or even gambling, or you know, any type of addiction,
yeah,
that becomes a real problem. It is not on you as the business owner to help them work through it. Even if they were a valued employee, what I would tell them is, listen, this is not working out because of your issues. If you get the help that you need and you get back on track, you'll always have a place with us, but for right now, it's just not going to work.
Yeah, exactly. You know, I've had to tell people, you know, that have basically been alcoholics, you know, I said, you're an alcoholic, you know, don't come to work high, do your job, you got a job here.
Yeah.
But don't come here and be an alcoholic, don't come in after work and, you know, non-working hours and be an alcoholic.
Yeah.
Go be it somewhere else, you know, I have a spot for you, I like you. But
yeah,
you can't create an environment that makes people uncomfortable here.
Especially in today's, you know, world, litigious world where everybody kind of sues each other. I grew up, you know, in the oil patch with my family, and right at the tail end of where guys could still drink on the job. You know, you'd always see a bottle of whiskey by the drillers deal, and right as I started to grow up in my teen years is when that started to really get cracked down on. You could not do anything like that anymore. So we lost a lot of good employees because they couldn't have a couple
Back in
sips
them
of whiskey.
days, people would get pulled over and they just drink a beer right in front of the cop.
Yeah, yeah, it was it's a little different world out there in the sticks, but you know, now there's just no tolerance on any drill sites or any oil field work that we do. You have to be completely sober. What you do in your own time is on you, but you cannot show up to work drunk or high or anything. You're immediately terminated. So yeah, that's a tough one. Now, the last part of that question I wanted to address is he wrote in there what he should write in the termination letter and how specific he should be. I am of the opinion, and I hope some people out there agree with me, that you should put as little as possible in a termination agreement. You should not give a reason why. All you should give is the dates that they're terminated, and just say, you know, effective immediately or effective on this date, you know, you're terminated. It should be 2 or 3 sentences at most. Nothing to do with the substance abuse, nothing to do with stealing, nothing to do with anything. And if you ever get a call for like a referral, you just say they worked here, and your only question that you can say is, I would not hire them again.
Yeah, you know, I mean, we've talked about that in the past, and I do understand the reasoning behind that about, you know, because obviously an employer can be malicious and say whatever, and then it's a he said, she said type deal.
Yep.
I get that. I think the one thing that we talked about before is build a record, you know, so give people verbal warnings, things like that, so at least you have a file.
Yep. Yep.
And then if it ever does come up, you know, because one thing that is a lot of times people will get fired for cause, and then they will go and apply for unemployment and stuff like that, and act like they didn't get fired for cause.
Yeah.
So if you have to, if you want to fight that and you need to fight it for some reason, or worse, you know, somebody sues you if they're able to sue you, then at least you have some kind of a paper trail.
Yeah, Oklahoma is a very employer-friendly state, and we are have like I think the best at-will for employers laws. But I tell all of my clients, my small business clients, to act as if you are not in an at-will state. Act as if you have to have cause to hire people as best you can. So document everything, record everything, have a big file for all of your clients, so in case anything like that happens. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think these days is CYA is the rule.
Yeah.
You know, as an employee as well.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you know.
Yeah, employees should be documenting everything as well too. Yeah. Just to prove, because like there's a lot of places like Paycom that we talked about the other week, and other places that are known for kind of maliciously firing people that should be protected, and they're not.
Yeah.
So.
That's
It's a rough world out there, you know, so cover your ass.
How to fire a longtime employee. So I'm genuinely curious to hear different opinions on this. Here's the background. We've had an employee for 17 years. Over that time, this person has become like family, but over the past 5 years has become increasingly unstable. There has been several specific offenses we consider fireable, but held back in the name of loyalty. Unfortunately, now our largest client has asked that this person no longer work on their business. It isn't financially feasible to hire someone to do that job and still pay a salary, and it's embarrassing that our client had to come out and say something we already knew, so it's time. Here is the dilemma. We are considering calling this a layoff rather than a firing. I hate to end the relationship on a lie, but it does seem as though it might be more kind than the unvarnished truth. What does everyone think? Well, this is a classic example of what we just talked about, fire fast, you know?
Yeah.
They've had 5 years, and they've known that it was a problem, and now they're embarrassed in front of their client, who they could have lost very easily.
Yeah, I think in that situation, it's better to just be truthful about it. And just tell the guy, say, look, you know, we've kept you on far longer than we otherwise would have because of the fact that, you know, we're like family.
Yeah.
But this is a business and we have to move forward, you know, and when our clients can't stand you, then we have to make a choice between you and our client, you know, because we will, if one client is saying it, then for sure other clients are thinking it.
Mm-hmm.
And I do believe that you wouldn't, how does that even work anyway, calling it a layoff, you know, you just tell somebody.
Well, it was an interesting thing. I'm not sure why exactly they're asking it, and it may be because of the state that they're in, like the actual state, but layoffs are considered less aggressive sometimes. Like if you go to a next job interview and say, you know, why were you let go? Like, I was laid off. But on the other hand, as I said before, if you get a call as an employer and they're asking for a reference, all you say is, you know, yes, they worked here at these times, and that's it. You're never saying that they were laid off because they stole or because they had gross misconduct or anything like that. And there's a lot of times I see on Reddit where people will be like, I got fired and it said on my termination notice misconduct. Like, am I screwed at my next job? Nobody asks. Like, it's not a thing, really. And nobody follows up on those questions very often. There's no permanent record like they used to scare us with when we were kids, except for your criminal record.
Here's something, though, that kind of bothers me, though, as an employer.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't think it's fair to me as an employer that I can't find out about these things that people do, you know? I mean,
yep.
Because if someone really is that bad, then it sucks for me that they can basically reinvent themselves and I can't find anything other. I can't ever know any different.
Somewhat, yeah. But also there's a little bit of, you know, we change as people, we grow up, we become better. So I like to think that if you're going to hire somebody, they maybe get a second chance. You know, you shouldn't, as long as they don't have a criminal record or they don't do crazy stuff on Facebook, you can at least give them a shot, you know. But I don't know, maybe there should be some type of permanent
I kind of, you know what though, I kind of, and you know, this is a little bit self-serving to say this, of course, because of how I am open on Facebook, but I kind of admire someone more who's true to themselves on Facebook, you know, as long as they're not being hurtful to other people.
Oh, and you know, when I say that, I'm not commenting too aggressively on anybody's, like, you know, liberal or conservative or anything like that. I don't think that should be judged. Mostly I just want to see that they're not putting, like, I'm a Nazi posts or weird, you know, nonsense that's going to bleed over into work. That's not great,
Right.
you know.
Yeah. I mean,
that would be against our social media policies.
Yeah, I can see that. You know, I'd be very willing to hire people, you know, who don't share my political views, as long as they're not presenting themselves as nutty.
Right. Well, and then they're respectful of everybody else's views.
Right.
That's the real ticket. So, but in this part, you know, calling it a layoff or firing, again, maybe the state makes a difference if there's somewhere that has employment laws that are a little bit different, but just keep it as short and sweet as possible in any type of paperwork that you put. Layoff or firing, it doesn't really matter. You know, if you do say layoff, like in Oklahoma, they'll definitely qualify for unemployment, but maybe you as the employer don't care if they've been around for so long.
Yeah. I think here the situation again is you got close to the person. When you get close to people and, you know, you really do want to see them
Succeed.
turn around
Yeah,
and succeed, and you've seen the best, that they can be, or you've seen them be a better version of themselves. People do go through things, Play goes through a divorce or something. I mean, listen, you asked me, how many times have I ever interviewed, right? Well, surprisingly, I've really not worked for that many other people in my adult life.
Yeah.
But I can say this, when I sold my last company, my first company, when I got out of it, I didn't sell it, but I sold my portion, right? I was in a pretty rough state. I had just gotten divorced, my first divorce, and then so one of my former clients hires me, right? And I went there, and I promise you that my first 2 weeks there was every day was a fireable offense.
Yeah.
Because I just didn't. I was in this really low point where I just didn't really care.
Yeah.
Like I literally came into work like 3 hours late my very first day. But I would do things like stay later too and start taking calls and things like that. So I was treating it more like I was an entrepreneur as well. But I could also see where for the regular employees, that clocked in at 9 o'clock and they're supposed to be there, seeing some dude waltz in at like noon, like he's a rock star and doesn't give a shit is disruptive.
Right. Well, and then see, do you think that negative attitude for a few weeks or even 6 months, and then if you did end up getting fired, should that carry on like some kind of permanent record so future employers could find that out? Or is it more just like, well, that's the past, we'll try again in the future?
No, and I think that's a very good point, because had that been the case, and had I needed to continue like getting employment,
Mm-hmm.
and that little episode there where I was working through my shit, had followed me,
Yeah.
that would have been a pretty black mark on my record,
Yeah.
if that was the only part that balanced out.
I mean, I can tell you after the first time I moved here, I worked for a commercial real estate firm. They fired me after about 18 months. If that would have followed me around forever, I probably would have never got another job. I was terrible at that job.
Yeah.
Horrible.
So basically, we are independent businessmen because we don't like working for anybody else.
Not good at working for
We're going to get a lot of black marks if we
No.
work for other people.
Yeah,
so.
no, I just didn't fit in the corporate world. It was
Yeah.
too hard,
Yeah, I can't really either. I get in. I've had a few jobs like that, and every time I come up against a rule, actually, Lulu asked me this morning. She goes, "Why did you get out of the military?" Right?
I still, knowing you today, cannot picture you in any way, shape, or form in the military. I don't know how you went through all that and dealt with all those regulations. It would have been wild to me.
Dude, it was crazy because it was exactly what I told her this morning. I said the reason I got out is because they were being just really dicks about their rules and regulations. They don't ever want anything questioned. They don't want to discuss it. They don't want to discuss it's literally, they tell you to do it, you hop to it and you do it, and you don't complain, and you don't show dissatisfaction,
I wonder
and you do it.
I wonder what our military would look like had you made a career out of that. You'd either be in Leavenworth or you'd be a 4-star general, and we'd have a much different military.
I don't know. People like me don't make it very far in the military. We'll put it that way.
Well, for firing, I think empathy is great, like you said, but I'm more of a just get to the point. Like what was his name? Chris
Boss.
Yeah, I think people can be emotionally resilient and realize that, it's just business. As long as you're not a jerk firing for no reason, just being straightforward and honest with the reason is the best way to do it. And for any letters or paperwork or anything, document all the reasons that you did terminate them, but just at the end, keep it short and sweet.
Well, yeah, and I wanted to finish my thought about that as well, is I think that sometimes there's a tendency, and I've been guilty of this, there's a tendency to want to preach to the person that you're firing and show them the error of their ways.
Right.
And wish them the well, like tell them, just, move on and better yourself, like do these things. If you'd have done these things when you're working for me, you wouldn't be getting fired, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I think that at least for myself, when I've done that, a good portion of that is me trying to justify the fact that I probably wasn't a great manager in some aspects.
Yeah, I feel that.
So
don't
you got to resist that tendency to try to put somebody down on their way out the door.
Yeah, or honestly, even if you're well intentionally trying to like build them up and give them advice about the future, once you say the words "you're terminated," they don't not care what you have to say anymore. I don't think. You know, they're just gonna be mad. They're not gonna hear it. You know.
I did get one time though fired with a letter that was very heartfelt, and I still have it to this day.
Mm-hmm.
And the letter basically said, look, John, you know, we think that you're very talented, we think you're very personable, you know, you're a nice guy to be around, but you also tend to take things too far when you feel like something's not right, and you really, you know, dig in, and that makes it unpleasant for people. So, you know, you need to understand, you know, that it's not always the content, it's the tone, you know, that you say it in.
Yeah.
And it was just really, you know, beautifully written. And it was the owner of the company. It was when I was a high diver, and I was very touched by it, you know. And I wish I could say that I had taken that advice to heart way back then when I first got it, but I wasn't in a good space for that. I wasn't angry though when I got it. I did read it and understand it, but I wasn't in a good space to be able to use that information.
Yeah.
But it was, I still have it to this day, and occasionally I'll get that card out and I'll read it, and I'll kind of measure, you know, my life against it and see, you know, how well I've done. And I feel like I'm a lot better now than I was back at, you know, 22 when I got that card.
Well, hopefully we're all a little better than we were
Right.
at 22.
Right, but you know, but sometimes it can be that way. So she wasn't trying to put me down in any way, and she genuinely was wishing me, you know, a successful life, and more or less giving advice to a young man that happened to have been in her employ for a year and a half.
Yeah. Well, fair enough. Any final thoughts on firing?
I say just do your best to figure out, you know, the way that's going to be most the least uncomfortable for you and the person that you're firing, you know, without but still, you know, being as transparent and honest as you can be.
Yeah, it's good advice. Just rip the Band-Aid though. Get it done, and get it done fast, right when you think it needs to be done, not.
I do agree with the fact that people are resilient, you know, and so if you can do it without leaving a really bitter taste in their mouth, you know, then they can move on and you can move on, and you know.
Everybody gets fired once in a while, so we've both been fired.
Yeah.
Many people have. Everybody I know has been fired at least once, so it just happens. So if you're the one who's got to do the firing, just quick to the point, get it done.
Today I fired a sponsor.
Well, there you go. There you go.
I fired wait, did I fire or did I quit? I can't remember what it would be. So if I'm sponsoring someone and I tell them I want to end the sponsorship.
I think it's just terminated. That works the best.
Terminated the relationship.
There you go.
There we go.
All right. Well, look for a bunch more information on turtlesmith.com, and you can find us at turtlesmithok at all of our socials. Anything else?
I got nothing else.
All right. We'll see you next week. Finger guns.
I was gonna say, I was gonna go full Trump and go, you're fired.